I'm Julia, 29, born to a single immigrant mother who worked 3 jobs to give me opportunities she never had. When I married Robert, I thought his wealthy family might eventually accept me despite my humble background. I never imagined they'd treat my mother like a servant at a birthday dinner or that my husband would join them. That night changed everything when an unexpected voice from the doorway made the entire room freeze in shock. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt judged for your background or family. Let me know in the comments if you've encountered people who think money determines someone's worth. My mother, Elena, raised me in a small apartment on the east side of town, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, but would still bring you soup when you were sick. She had immigrated from Spain when she was just 20, arriving with nothing but a suitcase and dreams of a better life. I never knew my father. He left before I was born, something my mother rarely discussed, except to say that some people aren't ready for responsibility when it finds them. Elena worked 3 jobs most of my childhood mornings, at a bakery, afternoons cleaning houses, and weekends at a local restaurant. Despite her exhausting schedule, she never missed my school events. She'd arrive still wearing her uniform, hair hastily tucked into a bun, hands red and raw from cleaning supplies. But her eyes would light up with pride when she saw me. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you, mi vida," she would tell me, her accent still thick despite years in America. "Study hard and doors will open." I took her words to heart. While other teenagers spent weekends at the mall, I buried myself in books at the public library. My hard work paid off when I earned a full scholarship to State University. Even with the scholarship, I worked part-time at the campus coffee shop and as a server for a catering company on weekends to cover living expenses. It was at one of those catering gigs during my senior year that I met Robert Blackwell. The event was a charity fundraiser for children's education held at the Grand Hotel downtown. I was serving champagne when a tall man with deep blue eyes stopped me. "This charity is supporting scholarships for underprivileged kids," he said, taking a glass from my tray. "Do you think it really makes a difference?" "I'm attending college on scholarship right now," I replied honestly. "So yes, I'd say it changes lives." Instead of moving on, he stayed asking questions about my studies and career plans. By the end of the night, he'd given me his card with his personal number scrawled on the back. "I'd like to continue our conversation," he said with a warm smile. Without the champagne tray between us. Robert was 32, 8 years into his career at his family's investment firm. He drove a car that cost more than my mother's annual salary and lived in a downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. On our first date, I felt completely out of place at the Michelin-starred restaurant he chose. "Just order whatever looks good," he encouraged, noticing my eyes widening at the prices. "Tonight is about getting to know you better." As our relationship progressed, Robert seemed genuinely interested in my background. He listened intently when I talked about my mother's sacrifices. He seemed charmed by our small apartment when he visited, complimenting Elena's homemade paella and laughing genuinely at her stories. "Your mother is amazing," he told me afterward. "To come to a new country alone and raise such an incredible daughter. That takes real strength." His apparent appreciation for my humble beginnings was one of the things that made me fall in love with him. Here was a man who could have dated anyone socialites, models women from his own privileged world, but he chose me. He seemed to value substance over status, character over connections. Meeting his family shattered that illusion. Victoria Blackwell greeted me with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and an appraising glance that made me feel like a horse at auction. At 58, she maintained the slim figure and coiffed appearance of someone who had made physical maintenance a part-time job. Her husband Richard, 60 at the time, was more pleasant but distant, clearly deferring to his wife in social matters. It was Robert's sister Amanda, 35, and dripping with casual disdain, who made her feelings most obvious. "So you're the scholarship girl," she said, swirling an expensive bourbon in her crystal glass. How quaint. Robert always did have a thing for charity cases. Though Robert defended me that first night, I noticed how quickly he fell back into family patterns in their presence. His vocabulary changed, his posture stiffened. The relaxed, open man I knew transformed into someone more guarded, more concerned with appearances. When he proposed 6 months later, I hesitated. I loved him, but I'd glimpsed enough of his family dynamic to worry. He promised me nothing would change. "We'll build our own life," he assured me. "My family will come around once they get to know you better." The wedding planning became the first battlefield. Victoria had strong opinions about everything from the venue to my dress, frequently making comments about elevating my taste. When I suggested incorporating some Spanish traditions to honor my heritage, she wrinkled her nose. "Let's keep things traditional, dear," she said, which I quickly realized meant traditionally Blackwell. My mother offered to cook some authentic Spanish dishes for the rehearsal dinner, a gesture that horrified Victoria. "We've already arranged catering from Maurice," she said dismissively. "Perhaps your mother could help set up the favors instead." Robert mediated these conflicts initially, sometimes siding with me, sometimes gently suggesting compromises that usually ended with his family getting their way. I told myself it was just wedding stress, that things would improve after we were married. I was wrong. Once the honeymoon ended, I watched my husband gradually shift. The man who had once listened with fascination to my mother's immigrant stories now checked his watch impatiently when she visited. The man who had claimed to value my perspective on wealth inequality now rolled his eyes when I suggested donations to causes supporting first-generation college students. "We give plenty to charity through the family foundation," he would say, closing the conversation. 3 years into our marriage, I sometimes looked at Robert and wondered where the man I fell in love with had gone, or if he had ever truly existed outside my imagination. The invitation to celebrate Richard's 60th birthday arrived via a formal card with gold embossing, followed by Robert's announcement that his parents expected a full weekend celebration at their estate in the countryside. "It's going to be quite an event," Robert said, loosening his tie after a long day at the office. "Dad's retiring as CEO this year, so they're combining the celebrations. The governor might even make an appearance." I nodded mentally, calculating which of my dresses might be acceptable to Victoria's scrutinizing gaze. "Who all will be there?" "The usual crowd. Family, some of Dad's business associates, a few of their club friends." He paused, checking his phone. "Mother's hired a Michelin-starred chef for the weekend. She's been planning this for months." I took a deep breath. "I'd like to invite my mother." Robert's fingers froze over his phone screen. "Your mother?" "Yes, Eleanor. My only family," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "It would mean a lot to me to have her there." He set his phone down slowly. "Julia, you know how these events are. It's very formal. Eleanor might not feel comfortable. Or your family might not feel comfortable with her there," I countered. "Which is it, Robert?" He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "That's not fair. It's just that these weekends have a certain flow. People who know the social expectations, the conversations. I'm thinking of Elena here. She might feel out of place." "She's a grown woman who can decide that for herself," I said, feeling my temper rise. "And she's my mother, the only parent I have. Would you exclude her from family celebrations for the rest of our lives?" After more discussion that bordered on argument, Robert reluctantly agreed Elena could attend the Saturday night dinner, the main event of the weekend. Not the entire weekend as other family members would, but at least the formal dinner. I considered it a small victory. Calling my mother with the invitation was harder than I expected. "Mija, are you sure?" she asked after a pause. "These people, they have not been kind to you, or welcoming to me." "All the more reason to go," I insisted. "You belong at family events just as much as Amanda or Victoria. You're my family, and Robert is going to have to accept that his family includes you now." Eleanor agreed reluctantly. I spent the next week helping her prepare, taking her shopping for a new dress that would be appropriate for such a formal event, without trying to mimic Victoria's designer wardrobe. We found a lovely midnight blue gown that complemented her olive skin and dark eyes. I arranged for her hair and makeup to be done professionally the day of the event. "You look beautiful, Mama," I told her when I picked her up that Saturday evening, and she did, elegant and dignified in a way that had nothing to do with designer labels or family names. "I just want to support you," she said, squeezing my hand. "But if these people are rude to you tonight, birthday or no birthday, we are leaving. Understood?" I nodded, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. In the 3 years since our wedding, relations with Robert's family had settled into a cold politeness. Not welcoming, but not openly hostile. I hoped the public nature of this celebration would ensure good behaviour from everyone. The drive to the Blackwell estate took nearly an hour. As we turned onto the long private drive lined with ancient oak trees, I could feel my mother tensing beside me. "Dios mío," she murmured as the house came into view. "It's like a small palace." The Blackwell family home was a sprawling colonial revival built in the 1920s, set on 30 acres of manicured grounds. Stone lions guarded the entrance to a circular drive, where valets were already parking guests' luxury vehicles. Through massive windows, we could see the warm glow of chandeliers and the silhouettes of well-dressed guests. "Remember," Robert said, as we pulled up to the entrance, "tonight is about Father. Everyone's attention will be on him, which is a good thing. Just keep conversation light. No politics or anything controversial. The way he said it, looking more at my mother than at me, made my stomach tighten. Before I could respond, a valet opened my door and we were committed. Victoria greeted us in the grand foyer, immaculate in a silver gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her smile tightened when she saw Eleanor. "Julia, darling," she air-kissed near both my cheeks. "And Eleanor, what a surprise." "I mentioned my mother would be joining us for dinner," I said smoothly. "For Richard's birthday celebration." "Of course," Victoria replied, her tone suggesting anything but. "How thoughtful of you to come, Eleanor. Richard will be so touched." As she led us through to the main parlour where guests were gathering for pre-dinner cocktails, Victoria kept up a stream of commentary clearly designed to emphasise the exclusivity of the event. "The governor just arrived with his wife. Oh, and there's the Huntingtons. He's just been named to the Federal Reserve Board. We're using the Sevres china tonight. It belonged to Richard's grandmother." My mother nodded politely, maintaining her dignity, despite Victoria's obvious attempts to intimidate. Robert drifted away almost immediately, drawn into conversation with some of his father's business associates, leaving us to fend for ourselves. Amanda spotted us from across the room, whispered something to her boyfriend Tyler, and then made her way over champagne flute in hand. "Julia," she greeted me coolly before turning to my mother. "And Eleanor, what a surprise. Mother didn't mention you'd be attending." "Last-minute addition, I said brightly. "We wouldn't miss Richard's birthday." Amanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, we're so glad you could fit it in. Your English is quite good, Eleanor. How long have you been in the country now?" 35 years, my mother replied calmly. "Almost as long as you have been alive." I suppressed a smile at Amanda's momentary discomfort. My mother might not have wealth or social status, but she had something the Blackwells often seemed to lack: genuine grace. As we moved through the room, I introduced Eleanor to the few people I knew. Some were polite, others barely concealed their surprise at meeting the mother of Robert's wife. I overheard one woman asking another, "Isn't she some sort of housekeeper?" By the time the butler announced dinner, I was already exhausted from the effort of maintaining composure in the face of so many small slights. But the real battle I would soon learn was just beginning. The Blackwell dining room could have been featured in Architectural Digest. A massive crystal chandelier hung over a table that could seat 30, now set with fine china, sterling silver and crystal glassware that caught the light like diamonds. Fresh flower arrangements featuring orchids and roses in silver vases ran down the centre, interspersed with candles in silver holders. Richard was seated at the head of the table with Victoria opposite him at the other end. Robert was placed at his father's right hand, with Amanda beside him. I found my name card halfway down the table, with my mother placed near the very end next to Tyler, and some distant cousins I'd met only once at our wedding. "There must be a mistake," I said quietly to Victoria when I noticed the arrangement. "My mother and I aren't seated together." "Oh, I'm sure Eleanor won't mind," Victoria replied with a dismissive wave. "Tyler majored in Spanish at Dartmouth. I'm sure they'll have plenty to chat about." I wanted to object further, but guests were already finding their seats, and making a scene would only embarrass my mother more. I caught her eye across the table and mouthed, "I'm sorry." She gave me a small nod that conveyed both understanding and resilience. The first course arrived, a delicate lobster bisque served with a crisp white wine. I watched anxiously as my mother navigated the multiple spoons at her setting, relieved to see her confidently select the correct one. Eleanor might not have been born into wealth, but she was observant and intelligent. She'd prepared for this evening, even watching YouTube videos on formal dining etiquette. Victoria clinked her glass to make a toast. "To Richard, my wonderful husband of 38 years. Not only a brilliant businessman, but a devoted father and grandfather. We're all so blessed to be in your orbit." Glasses were raised around the table. I noticed Eleanor sip her wine carefully, just a small taste rather than a full drink. She had never been much of a drinker, especially in unfamiliar settings. The conversation flowed around the table, mostly centered on business deals, recent vacations to exclusive resorts, and gentle gossip about mutual acquaintances. When someone asked Elena a direct question about her background, I tensed. "So, Mrs. Rodriguez, what line of work were you in before retirement?" asked one of Richard's colleagues. "I worked many jobs," my mother answered honestly. "Bakery, house cleaning, restaurant server. Whatever was necessary to provide for Julia and give her opportunities." "How?" "Industrious," the man replied clearly, unsure how to respond to such directness in this setting, where people typically obscured rather than revealed their struggles. "Yes," Elena smiled. I believe in honest work and education. Julia was the first in our family to attend university. I am very proud. I felt a surge of love for my mother's quiet dignity. She wasn't apologizing for her past or trying to impress anyone. She was simply stating her truth. As the soup bowls were cleared and the second course arrived, a delicate sea bass with saffron risotto, I noticed Tyler engaging my mother in conversation. At first I was relieved until I realized he was speaking to her in slow, exaggerated Spanish, as if she were a child or couldn't understand English. ¿Te gusta la comida?" he asked loudly, pointing to her plate. My mother responded in perfect English. "The food is excellent, thank you. Have you spent much time in Spain to practice your Spanish?" Tyler looked taken aback. "Oh, just a semester abroad in Barcelona. But I love the culture. The siestas, the sangria, the flamenco dancing." He made a clumsy hand gesture that I suppose was meant to mimic flamenco. "I am from northern Spain," my mother replied coolly. "Galicia, very different from Andalusia where flamenco originates. Spain has many distinct regions and cultures." Tyler's face flushed and he turned to speak to the person on his other side. I caught my mother's eye again and gave her an encouraging smile. As the main course was being served, a perfectly cooked filet mignon with truffle butter, a small accident occurred. One of the servers accidentally bumped my mother's arm while placing her plate, causing a few drops of red wine to spill onto the white tablecloth. "I am so sorry," Eleanor said immediately, though it clearly wasn't her fault. Victoria's reaction was immediate and disproportionate. "Oh dear," she exclaimed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "That's Irish linen from the 1920s. It's been in the family for generations." The server began blotting the small spot with a napkin, apologizing profusely. "It's just a few drops," I said, trying to diffuse the situation. "I'm sure it will come out." Victoria ignored me. "Perhaps we should have used the everyday linens after all," she said with a pointed look toward my mother, when entertaining a wider circle than usual. The implication was clear, and I felt heat rising to my face. Robert, seated too far away to intervene, seemed absorbed in conversation with his father and another business associate, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the situation. Amanda leaned toward her boyfriend, whispering loudly enough to be heard. "This is why Mother didn't want to invite her. Some people simply don't understand how to behave in civilized settings." My mother sat perfectly still, her face composed despite the humiliation being directed at her. Her only reaction was to fold her hands in her lap, a gesture I recognized from my childhood, her way of centering herself when upset. The dinner progressed with increasing tension. When dessert was being served, an elaborate chocolate souffle, I noticed with shock that the server bypassed my mother completely. "Excuse me," I called to the server. "My mother didn't receive dessert," Victoria interjected smoothly. "Oh, I thought Eleanor might prefer coffee instead. So many people are watching their sugar these days." "My mother would like dessert, please," I insisted, no longer caring if I sounded rude. "Really? It's fine," Eleanor said quietly. "I don't need dessert." "No, it's not fine," I replied loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Everyone else is being served. There's no reason you should be excluded." The server looked uncomfortable, caught between my insistence and whatever instructions Victoria had given earlier. Robert finally seemed to notice the commotion and frowned in my direction, giving a small headshake that clearly meant, "Don't make a scene." Before the situation could escalate further, Richard stood to make his birthday speech, effectively cutting off the dessert dispute. As he thanked everyone for coming and reflected on his years building the family business, I noticed my mother's composure beginning to crack. Though she maintained a pleasant expression, I could see the hurt in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hand as she sipped her water. I had never felt more torn, between supporting my mother and keeping peace in my marriage, between speaking up and keeping silent to avoid making things worse. By the time Richard finished his speech to enthusiastic applause, I had resolved to suggest we leave early, fabricating a headache or some other excuse. But the worst was yet to come. After Richard's speech, servers began clearing dessert plates and offering coffee and digestives. The formal part of the evening was transitioning to a more relaxed atmosphere, with some guests preparing to move to the drawing room for after-dinner drinks. That's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. One of the servers approached Victoria with a question about the coffee service. I couldn't hear the exact exchange, but Victoria's response carried clearly across the now quieter table. "We're short on the demi-tasse cups," she said with obvious annoyance. "Check with the kitchen staff." Robert, now standing near his father as they chatted with some guests, called over to the server, "Just bring what you have. The important guests get priority." I felt a flash of embarrassment at my husband's casual rudeness to the staff, but what happened next left me stunned. "Perhaps Elena could help sort it out," Robert said, gesturing toward my mother. "She has experience with this sort of thing, right?" The table didn't fall completely silent, but conversations definitely hushed. Several guests looked uncomfortable, while others seemed merely curious about the sudden tension. Victoria seized the opening. "What an excellent idea, Robert. Eleanor dear, would you mind helping in the kitchen? You must feel right at home there." My mother sat perfectly still, her face a careful mask that I knew concealed deep hurt. "Robert," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "what are you suggesting?" My husband looked annoyed at being challenged. "I'm just saying your mother probably knows her way around a kitchen better than most people here. It would be helpful." "Helpful," I repeated. "You want my mother, your guest, to leave the table and go work in the kitchen." "Don't be so dramatic, Julia," he snapped. "It was just a suggestion." Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Women like her belong in the kitchen, not at the table. I mean that as a compliment, of course. Some people have useful skills." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After 3 years of marriage, after all his promises about family acceptance, my husband was publicly suggesting my mother act as kitchen help at his father's birthday dinner. Amanda, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "She's nothing but a servant anyway. Mother was just being polite, inviting her." The room seemed to tilt around me. I saw my mother slowly rising from her seat, her dignity intact despite the humiliation being heaped upon her. "Mama, no," I said, standing as well. "You don't have to go anywhere. I think it's time for us to leave," she said quietly in Spanish. Robert approached, irritation clear on his face. "Julia, you're making a scene. Sit down." "A scene," I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "You just told my mother to go work in the kitchen at a dinner she was invited to as a guest. And you think I'm making a scene? You're overreacting," he hissed. "This is my father's birthday. Can you think about someone besides yourself for once?" That's when something broke inside me, the final thread of hope that Robert might eventually stand up for me and my family. "Someone besides myself," I echoed in disbelief. "For 3 years I've put up with your family's condescension and your silence when they disrespect me. For 3 years I've made excuses for you believing you were the man I thought I married. But you're not. You're just like them." Victoria stood now too, her face tight with anger. "That's quite enough, Julia. If you can't behave appropriately at a formal dinner, perhaps you should join your mother in leaving." "Appropriately?" I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. "Is it appropriate to exclude a guest from dessert, to suggest they go work in the kitchen, to call them a servant?" The room was fully silent now, all pretense of private conversations abandoned as the family drama unfolded. Richard looked deeply uncomfortable, but made no move to intervene. Amanda watched with poorly concealed satisfaction, while her boyfriend Tyler seemed fascinated by the spectacle. "You've never accepted me," I continued, looking around at the Blackwell family, "because I wasn't born into wealth, because my mother cleaned houses instead of sitting on charity boards. You've tolerated me because Robert wanted me, but you've never considered me family." Robert grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "That's enough. You're embarrassing yourself." I pulled away from his grip. "No, Robert. You're embarrassing yourself by treating my mother this way, by becoming someone who values status over kindness, by forgetting where I come from, where we come from." "Where you come from," Amanda interjected with a sneer, "is why you don't belong here. You can dress up in designer clothes and learn which fork to use, but you'll never be one of us. Neither will your cleaning lady mother." That was the final straw. I was about to respond when the dining room doors slammed open with a bang that made several guests jump in their seats. "Who dares insult my family?" The voice was deep, authoritative, and unmistakably furious. Every head in the room turned toward the doorway. Standing there in an impeccably tailored suit that even I could tell cost thousands was a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that matched my mother's. His presence commanded immediate attention, radiating the kind of confidence that comes not from inheritance, but achievement. The entire room froze when they saw who it was. My mother broke into a relieved smile. "Marco," she said, moving toward him. "You came." Marco Rodriguez, my uncle, my mother's brother, and to my complete shock, apparently someone the Blackwells recognized. because Richard Blackwell had gone white as a sheet. The silence that followed Marco's entrance was absolute. Not a fork clinked, not a chair creaked. Even the servers stood motionless, trays balanced perfectly as they watched the scene unfold. Victoria recovered first, social training kicking in despite her obvious shock. "Marco, what an unexpected pleasure. I didn't realize you were in town." My uncle ignored her completely, crossing the room to stand beside my mother. He placed a protective arm around her shoulders before addressing the room. "I apologize for my dramatic entrance," he said, his voice now controlled but still resonating with authority. "But I arrived in time to hear my sister and niece being insulted in a way I cannot ignore." Richard finally found his voice rising shakily from his seat. "Marco, there's been a misunderstanding. We had no idea Elena was your sister." "Wait." Richard knew my uncle. The confusion must have shown on my face, because Marco gave me a gentle smile. "I see my sister has been as modest about me as always," he said. "Perhaps some introductions are in order." He turned to address the entire table. "For those who don't know me, I'm Marco Rodriguez, founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies." The ripple of recognition that went through the room was immediate. Nexus Technologies was a global tech giant, one of the most successful companies to emerge in the last 20 years. Its founder was a self-made billionaire who rarely appeared in public but whose influence in the business world was legendary. And he was my uncle, my mother's brother. "Eleanor is my older sister," Marco continued, giving her shoulder a squeeze. "She chose a different path than I did, preferring to raise her daughter with the values of hard work and humility that our parents instilled in us. Values I've always admired and tried to maintain despite my financial success." I stared at my mother in shock. All these years, she had never mentioned that her brother was one of the wealthiest men in the country. When I'd asked about family back in Spain, she'd simply said they had lost touch over the years, a common enough story among immigrants. Marco turned his attention to Richard. "Richard, I believe you're aware that Nexus holds a controlling interest in Blackwell Investments. We've been the majority shareholder for the past 5 years." Richard nodded stiffly, his face ashen. "Yes, of course. And I believe your retirement transition plan included your son Robert taking over as CEO. Marco continued, his tone conversational, but with an edge that made it clear this was no friendly chat. Robert stepped forward, confusion warring with alarm on his face. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. We had no idea of your connection to Julia's family." Marco's expression hardened. "And that would have changed your behavior. You would have treated my sister with respect if you'd known she was related to someone wealthy and powerful, rather than just a hard-working woman who raised an exceptional daughter." Robert had no answer for that. Victoria attempted to salvage the situation. "Marco, we've always had the highest regard for Julia. She's part of our family now. Tonight was just a small misunderstanding that got out of hand." "A misunderstanding," Marco repeated. "Is that what you call suggesting my sister work in your kitchen during a dinner she was invited to as a guest? Is that what you call explicitly stating that she belongs in the kitchen, not at the table? Is that what you call referring to her as nothing but a servant?" Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The blatant classism that had seemed acceptable in the Blackwell bubble suddenly looked ugly when reflected back by someone they couldn't dismiss. "I've been watching your family for years, Richard," Marco continued, turning back to the head of the table. "When my niece told me she was dating your son, I was curious. When she married him, I was concerned. Nexus had just acquired majority shares in your company, and I wanted to be sure there was no conflict of interest." Richard's eyes widened as the implications of this statement sank in. "You've been evaluating us all this time." In a manner of speaking, Marco nodded. "Not for business reasons, ultimately, but to see what kind of family my niece had married into. To see if you valued her for herself or would merely tolerate her because of who she was." He glanced around the elegant dining room. "I had hoped that genuine character would win out over superficial concerns like background and social status. I'm disappointed to find that's not the case." The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Where Victoria and Amanda had wielded power through social positioning and wealth just minutes before they now seemed diminished, their behavior exposed as petty and cruel in the face of Marco's quiet authority. Robert looked shell-shocked, his gaze darting between Marco and me as if seeing both of us for the first time. "Julia," he began, reaching for my hand. "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" I pulled away from his touch. "Tell you what, Robert, that my uncle is wealthy. Would that have changed how you treated my mother tonight? Would that have made her worthy of your respect?" "Of course not," he stammered. "That's not what I meant." "I think it's exactly what you meant." I replied, the clarity of the moment crystallizing everything I'd been feeling for years. And that's the problem. Marco addressed Richard again. I had been considering Robert for a position on the Nexus board after your retirement, a stepping stone to potentially larger responsibilities. That offer is now withdrawn. Richard seemed to age 10 years before my eyes. Marco, please. This is just a family misunderstanding. Surely we can work something out. This isn't a business negotiation, Richard, Marco replied firmly. This is about how your family has treated my family, about the values you've demonstrated when you thought no one of consequence was watching. He turned to me with a gentler expression. Julia Eleanor, I have a car waiting. If you're ready to leave, I'd be happy to escort you. My mother looked at me questioningly, leaving the decision in my hands. I looked at Robert, searching his face for any sign of the man I thought I'd married. The man who had seemed to value me for who I was, not what I came from. All I saw was confusion and calculation, his mind already trying to find a way to salvage the situation. Yes, I said finally. I think we're ready to go. Victoria made one last desperate attempt. Julia, don't be hasty. Family disagreements happen in the best homes. We can talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmer. I turned to her with a sad smile. That's just it, Victoria. We're not family. You've made that abundantly clear tonight. As we walked toward the door, Marco's hand supportively on my back, I heard Amanda hiss to Robert. Did you know? Did you marry her because of her uncle's money? I didn't hear Robert's response. And in that moment, I realized I didn't care. Marco's car was a sleek, understated luxury sedan with a driver who opened the doors for us without comment. As we settled into the soft leather seats, the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. I can't believe you never told me, I said to my mother, a mixture of confusion and wonder in my voice. All these years. Elena reached for my hand. I'm sorry, Mika. Marco and I agreed long ago that his wealth should not change how I lived my life or raised you. I wanted you to grow up valuing hard work and education, not expecting everything to be handed to you because of a rich relative. But all those years you worked so hard, I protested. 3 jobs, the tiny apartment. And look at the woman you became because of it, she said proudly. Strong, independent, compassionate. Would you have been the same person if you'd grown up with wealth and privilege? Marco smiled from the seat opposite us. My sister has always been the wisest one in our family. When I started making real money with Nexus, I begged her to let me help more. All she would accept was enough to ensure your college education would be paid for if your scholarships fell through. I turned to my uncle, still trying to process his role in all of this. How long have you known about the Blackwells, about my relationship with Robert? Since your 3rd date, he admitted with a small smile. Elena called me when things started getting serious. We've always stayed in close touch, even if we don't see each other as often as we'd like. But why didn't you say anything when I got engaged? When things started going wrong with Robert's family? Marco's expression grew more serious. I wanted to believe me, but Eleanor insisted we let you make your own choices, find your own way. She believed Robert truly loved you for yourself and that his family would eventually come around. We both hoped that would be the case. And tonight, I asked, curious about his dramatic entrance. How did you know to be there? That was my doing, Eleanor admitted. When you told me about the dinner invitation, I had a bad feeling. I called Marco and asked him to be nearby just in case. When I texted him from the bathroom after the wine spill incident, he was already in the neighborhood. I sat back, overwhelmed by these revelations. For years, I had believed my family background was simple, modest, exactly what it appeared to be. Learning that my mother had deliberately chosen a life of hardship when easier options were available changed nothing and everything at once. Are you angry with me? Eleanor asked softly. I squeezed her hand. No, Mama. Surprised, confused, but not angry. I understand why you made the choices you did. I just wish that Robert and his family could have accepted you without knowing about Marco's wealth, she finished for me. That they could have seen your worth regardless of your background. Yes. I nodded, feeling tears starting to form. That's exactly it. And now you know they can't, Marco said gently. The question is, what happens next? The car pulled up to Marco's residence, a penthouse apartment in the city's most exclusive high-rise. As the elevator carried us silently to the top floor, I felt strangely weightless, as if I'd been freed from a burden I hadn't fully recognized until it was lifted. The next few weeks passed in a blur of painful clarity and difficult decisions. I stayed in Marco's guest suite while I sorted through my feelings and options. Robert called and texted constantly the first few days, his messages vacillating between apologies, justifications, and increasingly desperate attempts to salvage both our marriage and his career prospects. "Julia, please," he said during one of the few calls I answered. "You have to understand my position." "If I'd known about your uncle..." "That's exactly the problem," I interrupted. "The fact that it would have made a difference to you. The fact that my worth in your family's eyes could be determined by who I'm related to rather than who I am." "That's not fair," he protested. "Anyone would be impressed by a connection to Marco Rodriguez. That's just reality." "Then I don't want to live in that reality anymore," I replied, ending the call. Marco was true to his word about withdrawing his support for Robert's career advancement. Through business channels, I learned that Richard's retirement had been accelerated and an outside executive had been brought in to manage Blackwell investments through the transition. The family's social standing, so carefully cultivated by Victoria over decades, took a significant hit as word spread about the disastrous birthday dinner. Amanda attempted damage control by reaching out to me directly, her message so transparent it would have been comical under different circumstances. "Julia, darling," she cooed over the phone. "This family spat has gone on long enough. Mother feels terrible about the misunderstanding and we all miss you. Why don't we have lunch at the club next week and put this behind us?" "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "Is that what you call telling my mother she belongs in the kitchen, calling her a servant?" There was a pause before Amanda's voice hardened. "People say things they don't mean when they're upset. Besides, how were we supposed to know she was Marco Rodriguez's sister? You deliberately hid that information from everyone. And that's the only reason you'd treat her with respect," I concluded. "Thank you for making my decision even easier, Amanda. Filing for divorce was simultaneously the hardest and easiest decision I'd ever made. Hard because I had truly loved Robert, or at least the man I thought he was. Easy because that man had proven to be an illusion, a reflection of my hopes rather than reality. Robert fought the divorce initially, hiring an aggressive attorney who suggested my deliberate concealment of my uncle's identity constituted a form of fraud. Marco connected me with the best family law attorney in the city, who dismissed these claims with professional contempt. "Your husband's family publicly humiliated your mother and admitted they would have treated her differently had they known her brother was wealthy," the attorney summarized. "That's not a defense, Mr. Blackwell. That's an admission of character failure that any judge will recognize." Faced with the prospect of having his family's behavior examined in open court, Robert eventually agreed to a settlement that was fair but not excessive. I wanted nothing from the Blackwells except my freedom and the opportunity to rebuild my life on my terms. Eleanor, ever supportive, encouraged me to take time to heal. Heartbreak is like any other injury, Mika. It needs time and care to mend properly. Marco, in his practical way, offered opportunities rather than just sympathy. "When you're ready, he told me one evening as we shared dinner on his penthouse terrace, "there's a foundation I've been wanting to establish. Something to help first-generation college students, not just with scholarships, but with mentoring, internships, career development. It needs someone to shape it, someone who understands both worlds." The idea resonated with me immediately. "You mean like a bridge between students from backgrounds like mine and opportunities in companies like yours?" He nodded, pleased by my quick understanding. "Exactly. Academic achievement gets these students in the door, but navigating the unwritten rules of corporate culture is where many struggle. That's where your experience would be invaluable." In the months that followed as my divorce became final and I began to rediscover who I was outside my marriage, the foundation concept evolved from conversation to reality. I threw myself into developing its structure and mission, finding purpose in creating opportunities for students who, like me, had the talent and drive, but lacked the connections that so often determined success. We named it the Elena Foundation over my mother's modest protests. "It should bear the name of the woman whose values inspired it," Marco insisted. "The woman who chose to raise her daughter to value character over wealth even when easier paths were available." Elena eventually conceded on the condition that she could serve as a mentor to students rather than just a figurehead. At 65, she had wisdom to share that no business degree could provide. One year after the disastrous birthday dinner, I found myself accidentally crossing paths with Robert at a charity event. I was there representing the Elena Foundation. He was accompanying his parents, who were major donors to the hospital, hosting the fundraiser. We spotted each other across the ballroom, and after a moment's hesitation, he approached my table. "Julia," he said, uncertainty clear in his voice. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how little I felt seeing him again. Not anger or hurt, just a calm recognition of someone I used to know. "How are you?" "Managing," he said with a weak attempt at his old charming smile. Dad's fully retired now. I'm running the family office smaller scale than we'd planned, but still, it's something. I nodded, not particularly interested in the details of the Blackwell's diminished circumstances, but not wishing him ill either. And you? He asked. Marco's foundation is making quite a splash in the education world. It's fulfilling work, I said simply. I'm where I'm supposed to be. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. I was wrong, Julia, about so many things. I should have stood up for you and Eleanor. I should have been better. The apology seemed genuine, but it came a year too late, and only after his family had faced consequences for their behaviour. I hope you become better, Robert, I said with sincerity, for your own sake. As we parted ways, I realised how completely I had moved on. The hurt that had once seemed unbearable had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. The Blackwells no longer had the power to determine my worth, because I had finally fully recognised it for myself. That evening, as I drove to my mother's house for our weekly dinner, she had finally allowed Marco to buy her a comfortable home in a nice neighbourhood, though she insisted it be modest by his standards. I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in a year. I had lost a husband, but reclaimed my self-respect. I had discovered a family secret, but in the process, gained a deeper appreciation for my mother's wisdom and sacrifice. I had been publicly humiliated, but emerged stronger with a clearer understanding of what truly mattered. As I pulled into Elena's driveway, I saw her and Marco on the front porch laughing together as they waited for me. Family, not defined by wealth or status, but by love, support, and shared values. I was home. Have you ever stood up for yourself when someone tried to make you feel less than? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their worth isn't determined by others' opinions. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, true family is defined by love and respect, not by money or status.